let's first talk about how plants colonize land. So we were talking before how kind of the history of the diversity of life on our planet. And green algae was considered to be the first plants, and there's some reasons that we'll talk about in a sec, that they are similar to land plants. Land plants, of course, are on land, not in water, and so they have the problem of drying out. And the evolution or the movement of organisms to land happened about 500 million years ago. So plants are multicellular heterotrophs. I'm sorry, autotrophs. I said that incorrectly, sorry. And they have some ecological features, like they stabilize landscapes. They also produce oxygen for our atmosphere. And they produce organic compounds for organisms. And both the oxygen and these organic compounds can be used in the respiration process that is done by all organisms. Okay, so charophycans, which phyceans, I guess you say, are a type of green algae that is the most closely related to land plants. Now, some other groups are also photosynthetic, and as we've been talking about before, going through some of these groups like dinoflagellates, for example, or all the different types of algae, green, brown, red, etc. They are also photosynthetic, but they perhaps are slightly different. Also, different than land plants. I mean, they have cell walls. Some of them have cell walls of cellulose. Green algae, the brown algae, and dinoflagellates have cell walls of cellulose, and a lot of them have chloroplasts, or some of them have chloroplasts with chlorophyll A and B. The green algae have that, Euglena has that, and dinoflagellates have that. So the things that are unique to charophyceans and plants are something called a rosette complexant. So this is a rose-shaped structure that is for the synthesis of cellulose as the organism is making cell walls. They have peroxisome enzymes. You might recall the process of photorespiration from Core 1. This is a process where the plant can lose carbon if the stomata are closed or if there is low carbon dioxide available. And so they would need that, especially on land. And flagellated sperm structure. This is something, so initially the gametes were not different. In other words, were not necessarily what you would consider male and female gametes. They were just one-end cells. And later they became, you had flagellated sperm, and then the egg, which was unflagellated. And later on, some of the plants lost that. You're going to see as we go through the life cycles, but this is considered more advanced than just gametes floating around in the water. They also form a phragmoplast. A phragmoplast is a structure that happens during cell division. It goes across the center part of the cell. You might remember that a plant cell forms a cell wall by making a cell membrane first. And this phragmoplast exists there, and it basically is are protein strands that are going to go through where the membrane is forming that will create the plasmodesmata. It's kind of unique. And also there's a bunch of genetic evidence that supports that too. You guys can read about that if you're interested. Some adaptations for land living are sporopollenin. Sporopollenin is a waxy substance that, in particular, it covers the gametes, and it helps keep them from drying out. Walled spores or sporangia, that is a structure that holds the gametes inside, that may contain sporopollenin on the outside or perhaps even on an inside layer. And multicellular gametophyte, that means a structure that actually holds the gametes, that is protective. A multicellular dependent embryo, in other words, the embryo inside of a multicellular structure. And something called alternation of generations. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. So the difference between, just kind of a general life cycle is is that you have a diploid cell that undergoes meiosis and produces gametes. So you probably remember talking about this in Core 1, where you produce egg and sperm, and the egg and sperm then would get together through fertilization and create a diploid organism like us. All right, so that's a typical life cycle of us, for example. And some organisms are mostly just either 1N or 2N. In other words, they reproduce via mitosis or a mitosis-like process, like binary fission or something like that. And those organisms would have the same genetic information in all of the cells, perhaps changing a little bit with the plasmids and so forth, like we talked about with some of the bacteria. But this plants and some fungi have this kind of arrangement. That is, they have a structure that is multicellular that is 2N. All right, so this is the multicellular structure that is going to have some cells that are going to do meiosis and produce 1N cells or gametes. May or may not be flagellated for one of them, and the other one, of course, is the egg. And that is going to grow into a gametophytic structure. Or I'm sorry, I misspoke here for plants. So these gametes are 1N, and they will grow into a gametophytic structure. Now, this is a multicellular structure that will then have some cells that are going to produce the egg and sperm. So these would be the egg and sperm over here. And they are going to get together through fertilization, make a zygote that grows into a multicellular structure. So the difference is that, first of all, it's time. That is, there's a big time spent as a 2N organism and a big time spent as a 1N organism. And you're going to see early on it's more in this, the gametophytic stage than the sporophytic stage. And later on, it's going to be more in the sporophytic stage and less in the gametophytic stage. But always, these two stages are multicellular, and that's the big difference between us and them. That is, when we do meiosis, we create egg and sperm that do not grow into a multicellular structure. So that's a big difference in the two. Just as a comparison of the groups, this is just showing you plants and some algae. Actually, some fungi kind of look like this too. Animals are more like this, and this is of course more like the Proteus group. So you guys check this out. They're also saying fungi is like this. Fungi it can do different things. So we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so some other features of land plants are cuticle. So cuticle is a waxy substance that covers the whole outside of the plant. So as you have these multicellular structures, you're going to have this covering, and in order to allow gases to go in and out of the covering, you have to have stomata. So stomata are openings in this covering, and we'll talk more about that later. And then you have something called secondary metabolites. Secondary metabolites are defense mechanisms. They're produced and held in the cell, the central vacuole of a plant cell. Things like anthocyanins, which are the purple substances. They give the plants color, so those wouldn't be defense necessarily. They might be for attraction. You have things that are like alkaloids, things like nicotine, where if a animal eats that, they die, or they like cocaine is one. Their mouth will become numb and they can't eat. So these are sometimes defense mechanisms, or sometimes used as attractive mechanisms in flowers and things like that. Then also vascular tissue. That means a tissue that is going to allow the flow of substances from one part of the multicellular organism to the other inside the plant, and later vessels or vessel members, which are larger vascular tissue.